The Jets lose their best offensive player for 3 to 4 weeks with a knee sprain. It's both a devastating blow for the offense and a possible blessing in disguise. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, November 11th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On today's show, our focus is Jets skill positions. There is more quarterback chaos as the Jets prepare for their Week 11 Thursday night game against the New England Patriots. The calculus has changed about what the Jets need to do with Breece Hall this offseason after the trade deadline, and some bad news at the wide receiver position for this team. That's where we will begin. ESPN's Rich Cimini broke the news yesterday that Garrett Wilson will be out 3 to 4 weeks with a knee sprain. Tough break for the Jets on offense, and a tough break for Garrett. He had just come back from a separate knee injury when the Jets lost in London to the Denver Broncos. He suffered a knee injury on the last series of that game. He missed the next two games and came out of the bye back in the lineup, only to suffer another knee injury, which will keep him out 3 to 4 weeks. And I think there are lots of different angles we can go with this knee injury. Number one, the Jets should shut Garrett Wilson down until he's fully 100% recovered. This team is not going anywhere. I know they've won 2 in a row. They're 2-7. This team is not going to make a playoff push. The Jets are playing out the string. So there's no reason to rush Garrett Wilson back into the lineup before he's 100% healthy. Now, once he's 100% healthy, of course, you put him out there. The Jets are still going to try and win these games going forward. But this is not a situation where the Jets should take any risk with Garrett Wilson. They should not play him if he's compromised at all, because you don't want to risk a more serious injury heading into the offseason. You want Garrett healthy into the offseason, and you want him at 100% preparing for 2026. 2025 has not been the Jets season, and it hasn't been Garrett's season from the standpoint that, he suffered these back-to-back knee injuries. Now, if we want to talk about the impact of the Jets on offense, I mean, it's a devastating loss. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, the Jets had their best offensive game of the year against Cincinnati. They put up 39 points. That doesn't prove that the Jets offense is better without Garrett Wilson. I mean, there were lots of extenuating circumstances in that game. Namely, they played a horrible Cincinnati defense. Jets may have put up more points if Garrett Wilson had played in that game. You can't take these small sample sizes and just assume that the Jets are better off because they played a good game against the Bengals. Look at the other game Garrett missed. That was a really ugly loss to the Carolina Panthers where no receiver could get open. And, the Jets had issues at quarterback in that game, of course, but they lost a game where they scored 13 points. I mean, that's more indicative of Garrett Wilson's impact to this football team than a random 39-point outburst against a horrible Cincinnati defense. The Jets are already kind of challenged moving the ball through the air, and this is just going to make it more difficult. At the same time, I look at the current Jets situation, and it's not that it's good to lose a Garrett Wilson, but if you have to lose a Garrett Wilson, this is probably the least bad time for it to happen, because number one, the season's over. As I mentioned earlier, we know at 2-7, even with back-to-back wins, this is not a Jets team that's going to the playoffs. This is not a Jets team that's going to have a winning season. It's happened at a point where the Jets are not really playing competitive football. They're just playing out the string. But beyond that, this does open up opportunities for a couple of young receivers the Jets just acquired. They got John Metchie from Philadelphia in the Michael Carter II trade, and Adonai Mitchell comes to the Jets from the Indianapolis Colts as part of the Sauce Gardner trade. And this isn't just about young guys getting reps. These are young guys who the Jets haven't had before. It gives the Jets an opportunity to, first of all, get these guys into the lineup, get them experience, but also a chance to see whether they fit into this offense. And it's very difficult to integrate new wide receivers halfway through the season. So I think expectations need to be low. These two guys also have not produced in a big way since entering the NFL. So that's another reason that, I don't think we should have super high expectations. Mitchell was in a pretty deep Colts receiver room. Metchie has dealt with as much adversity as any player who's ever entered the NFL in the 21st century. I mean, he ended his college career with a serious knee injury. He was diagnosed with leukemia his rookie year. So he sat that year out, got traded twice in the span of a couple of months. He got traded from Houston to Philadelphia at the end of training camp this year, now Philadelphia to the Jets. So, some really challenging circumstances for John Metchie, a lot to overcome. But these are both guys who, it was worth bringing them in because they've both shown ability. Metchie in college was a pretty good route runner. He was a guy who seemed to understand the nuances of the position. Mitchell's kind of the opposite. Mitchell's a guy who's got a lot of physical ability, but still trying to learn the nuances of the wide receiver position. And the Jets are in a very unique position right now. And it's not just that they're losing games, but they're kind of like in year one of their latest version of their resets. With the Jets, unfortunately, it's kind of been a perpetual rebuild over the last decade and a half. But when you're in year one, there's not a lot of pressure on the coaching staff and front office to win games, even when you're bad. Year two, year three, you really have to focus on trying to turn things around if you're a coach or a GM on a struggling team, because if you don't, you may not get fired, but you may begin the next season on the hot seat if you don't start showing progress near the end of the season. The Jets are a team that is just loading the field with young players this season. And the deeper we've gotten into the season, the more of a youth movement we've seen. I think one of the challenges in the NFL is you have to balance developing players versus winning. But in almost every situation, winning takes precedence. I think the NFL does not serve its developmental players well. There's no developmental spring league anymore with NFL Europe gone, and NFL Europe's been gone for decades. There used to be a spring league where teams could send players to get game reps in Europe. That's gone, and that's part of like an NFL marketing strategy change where they've decided to just start playing regular season games in Europe rather than having their developmental spring league over there. So that's gone. There's no minor league. I don't understand how the NFL has no games where teams can just use for purely developmental purposes. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So really the only time you can get players game reps are during actual NFL games. That's where I think teams underutilize the exhibition season. I mean, if I was a coach, I would play the players I was most trying to develop a lot in the exhibition season, but you don't get that opportunity. So the only real game reps outside of the exhibition games, and you only get 3 of them, are the 17 regular season games. It's tough to use the 17 regular season games to just get guys reps, except if you're in a position like the Jets, where there's not a lot of pressure to win, where the season's really about building for the future anyway, where you're using these regular season games to try and develop players. So Adonai Mitchell and John Metchie both now can get opportunities. And look, if Garrett Wilson was healthy, of course you put Garrett Wilson on the field. Garrett Wilson's a star. Garrett Wilson makes your team better. If you have to lose Garrett Wilson, though, at some point, this is probably the situation where you'd want it to happen, where you're actually opening up reps in games that don't really mean a whole lot for young guys who you're hoping will help the team going forward. And look, no matter what happens with Adonai Mitchell and John Metchie, the Jets are going to have to upgrade the wide receiver room in the offseason. If either of these guys shows that they can be a good depth receiver, like a good number 4 guy, a good backup, I think that would be a good development for this team. I think it's a lot to ask for these guys to come in midseason and suddenly look like starting receivers, much less a number 2 receiver. I think if that's your expectation, you're very likely to be disappointed. But now with Garrett Wilson out, and look, I mean, Josh Reynolds has been out, and if your choice is playing Josh Reynolds or playing a young guy who could be part of your future, I think the young guy who's part of your future would make more sense. The other aspect here is you're not trying to develop a quarterback. We have more quarterback drama with the Jets that we'll talk about a little bit later, but Justin Fields is not going to be with the team for much longer, and Tyrod Taylor might be at the end of his career. So it's not like you're short-circuiting a quarterback you're trying to develop. If the Jets had a rookie quarterback in there, if it's 12 months from now and the Jets have a rookie quarterback, you want Garrett Wilson in there because you don't want to put inexperienced wide receivers around the rookie quarterback. Jets don't have that. So, this is a situation that actually in some ways benefits the Jets to get these young guys some reps and give them an opportunity to show what they can do. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about another guy who's been showing what he could do over the last couple of weeks, and that's Breece Hall. I think he's become close to a must re-sign for the New York Jets. And the trade deadline, what the Jets did by trading Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, changed my perspective on that. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Rippling. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS. That's SAD, software as a disservice. And that's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the united platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. By uniting your employees, teams, and departments in one system, Rippling removes the bottlenecks, busyworks, and silos your software created. Everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. It's seriously simple to use and gives companies one source of truth for their people, data, and everything they touch. Whether you want to run your entire HR, IT, and finance operations as one, or just fill in the gaps in your software stack, Rippling can do it all. And right now you get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnfl. Learn more at rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl for 6 months free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. You can also get into the NFL action on FanDuel. The Jets are heading to Foxborough for Week 11 action. It's Thursday Night Football. The Patriots are 8-2. The Jets are 2-7. It's no surprise. New England is a 10.5-point home favorite. FanDuel's the place to get in on the action. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, our position is Jet skills players. We talked in the first segment about Garrett Wilson's injury. It certainly hurts the Jets on offense. It does open up opportunities for some young guys to step up. Now let's talk about Breece Hall, who was one of the big stars of the Jets' win over the Cleveland Browns. And 2 weeks before that, he was one of the big stars of the Jets' win over the Cincinnati Bengals. Breece is approaching free agency, and he was the subject of a lot of speculation at the trade deadline. In fact, there was actually more speculation about Breece Hall getting traded than there was Quinnen Williams or Sauce Gardner. And it's easy to understand because Breece is in the final year of his contract. I think that heading into the deadline, the view most people, including myself, had was that the Jets either needed to commit to keeping Breece or they needed to trade him, because the one thing the Jets can't have is Breece Hall walking in free agency and getting nothing in return for him. That would be really bad process by Jets management, because this is not a season where the Jets are going anywhere. If you're in a playoff push, you might say, you know what, we're going to take the chance. Even if we lose the guy in the offseason, we're going to try. We're a better team right now. We're going to try and make the playoffs and make a run. That's not the situation the Jets are in right now. The situation the Jets are in, they are not going to the playoffs this year. So any player who's not returning next year should have been traded at the deadline for whatever you could get for them. I do think that the way the Jets should approach Breece Hall, though, has changed as a result of what the team did at the trade deadline, because this is a very different Jets team from what we had a week ago. And it's a very different Jets plan from what we had a week ago. This time last week, before the trade deadline hit, the Jets had a core that they were trying to build around. And that core was really 3-star players: Garrett Wilson, Quinnen Williams, and Sauce Gardner. Those were, I think, fair to say, the 3 genuine stars on this team. And then there were some other good players you'd fill in, like the second-tier guys. Breece Hall was one of them. And when you have the core, and when you have 3 guys who are making a lot of money, or at least will be making a lot of money going forward, Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner had signed contract extensions during the offseason, you have to fill in around that core smartly. You have to invest in draft picks, because you're committing a lot of money to your core players. You need to, and when you sign players or re-sign players, you need to be smart with how you spend your money, because this is a league with a salary cap. This is a league where you have to make financially prudent decisions, particularly when you're paying guys at top of the market money, as the Jets are doing with their big stars. I think that the trade deadline changed a lot, and the Jets' approach is now completely different. This is now a Jets team with very little in the way of veteran talent, very little in the way of big money veterans. In fact, you could say in many ways, Garrett Wilson's really the only guy making big money at this point. This is a Jets team that's now loading up on draft picks. There is a huge youth movement that's already underway. Any game recap I give this year, I mentioned this, that there's usually between 9 and 11 first and second year players seeing big playing time. And the Jets have now loaded up with draft picks. This year, it's in 2026, it's going to be 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. In 2026, it's going to be two first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. In 2027, it's going to be 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick. So you're going to have a lot of young talent coming in, and that young talent's going to be cost-controlled. When you don't have a lot of veteran players, you end up with an inordinate amount of cap space. You have probably more cap space than you can reasonably spend. The core of your team is no longer veteran players. The core of your team is no longer the expensive guys. The core of your team is going to be the young talent. And the challenge becomes filling in around the young talent with veteran players. When you have that amount of cap space and when you don't have veteran stars, it's impossible to have all of your contracts be good contracts. You're going to have overpays. When you have the amount of, again, like with the amount of cap space the Jets going to have after shedding the Gardner and Quinnen Williams contracts, there's no way to spend all that money in a way where all of your contracts are good contracts per se. You're going to have some contracts where you look at, you just say, that's too much money. But there is a difference between a good overpay and a bad overpay in the NFL. The approach the Jets are taking is perfectly valid. I in a lot of ways, I like the idea of just building around draft picks, building around a youth movement. So the question is, where do you target your overpays? And I think we know that the Jets are very likely to draft a quarterback next spring. If they don't draft him next spring, I'm convinced it's going to happen in 2026. If it doesn't happen in 2026, it's a virtual lock. It will happen in 2027 when the Jets have 3 first-round picks, when the Jets will have enough draft capital to move up if they want to, when they'll have enough draft capital to build around a quarterback properly. I think one of the next 2 years, the Jets are going to be drafting a young quarterback. And you think back to why a lot of the other recent Jets young quarterbacks have failed. They have not properly surrounded those players with supporting talent. And that's how, and I think that, when it comes to surrounding the quarterback with talent, that's where you overpay. When Breece Hall was maybe like the 4th or 5th best player on the Jets team, that's a situation where maybe you want to, and that was the situation when Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams and Garrett Wilson were all here. Now Garrett's the only one. That's a situation where, you want to be financially prudent with Breece, particularly because running back's not typically viewed as a big value position. When you have pretty much no big money veteran contracts aside from Garrett Wilson, and you've got a young quarterback you're looking to support, that's where it makes sense to overpay Breece, because Breece is the type of player who will help a young quarterback. Now, we've talked a lot on this show about what Breece is and what Breece isn't. I think that Breece would be best served being as part of a platoon. I think he's a high-end tandem back, where if you get a guy who's a powerful runner between the tackles, maybe it's Braylon Allen, maybe it's somebody else, that's where Breece is really going to shine on a week-to-week basis. Right now, the current version of Breece Hall, he has some huge games like he had against Cincinnati, he had against Cleveland, and then some games where he doesn't do that much. I think if you put Breece into more of a platoon situation, you'd see him more consistent on a week-to-week basis. But there's no question a Breece Hall will help a young quarterback quite a bit. A guy who's a game breaker, every 20-yard run Breece Hall breaks in a game is one less 20-yard pass your young quarterback needs to hit. If your young quarterback's kind of confused by a defensive look, it's very helpful to be able to just check the ball down to a guy who's an explosive playmaker like Breece Hall. So, in the previous scenario where the Jets were paying a bunch of other veterans big money and cap space was limited, I would be very hesitant to overpay Breece. In a new scenario where cap space is virtually unlimited for the Jets and you're going to have to make some bad contracts anyway, Breece is the type of guy you overpay, because you've seen that he can work with you in your locker room. You've seen that he can work in your system. It's just a different game than it was a week ago for this football team. And, Breece has over the last couple of weeks expressed, at least publicly, that he wants to be here. Now, I don't know how much of that is real, how much of it is Breece just being diplomatic, but he's at least publicly not denied that he would accept a new contract to stay with the Jets. So it doesn't seem like he's rushing for the exits. So I think that Breece Hall is not a guy who's an elite back right now, despite what's happened the last 2 games. but he's a guy who can be a real asset for the New York Jets going forward. I mean, I think back, there's one thing that really comes to mind to me was the offseason where the Jets signed Trumaine Johnson, and that was heading into Sam Darnold's rookie year. They overpaid Trumaine Johnson. Jets were in a similar situation as they are now, where they didn't have a lot of veteran players, and they had a lot of cap space, so they had to throw money at guys. The Jets threw money at Trumaine Johnson. And even at the time, I felt the guy the Jets should have thrown money at was Allen Robinson, because Allen Robinson was the guy who would help Sam Darnold, who hadn't been drafted yet. But you knew the Jets were drafting a rookie that year too, and I didn't understand why the Jets wouldn't throw money, why you prioritize corner over wide receiver. That's the focus now. Has to be, when you overpay, it has to be overpaying in supporting the next quarterback, and that's where I think it now suddenly makes all the sense in the world to just give Breece Hall what he wants and keep him here. As long as Breece Hall isn't looking for like wide receiver money, he's a guy the Jets should be investing in keeping. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we got to talk about the quarterback position. It's not been a good position for the Jets. We know there's going to be a new guy in here next year. We know Justin Fields is probably not going to be back. Tyrod Taylor's not coming back, but somebody's got to start this game Thursday night. Aaron Glenn isn't telling us which of the two quarterbacks starts, and I'm not sure how much of a difference it makes. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it, because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about Jets skill positions today. There's been a lot of news. Garrett Wilson is out 3 to 4 weeks with a knee sprain. We also talked a bit about Breece Hall and the decision the Jets are going to have to make on him this offseason. Now let's talk about the quarterback position. Jets head coach Aaron Glenn spoke to the media on Monday, and he said that I'm not naming my starting quarterback for Thursday night against the Patriots, which is not a change. The last 2 weeks, Glenn has not revealed in advance who was going to be starting at quarterback for the Jets. Now, 3 weeks ago when the Jets played against Cincinnati before the bye, there was actually a pretty good reason for that. Justin Fields had been benched the previous week against the Carolina Panthers. It seemed very likely that Tyrod Taylor was going to start that game in place of Fields, but Taylor was dealing with a knee injury, and that knee injury kept Taylor out of the game. The Jets ended up starting Fields. Fields ended up having a big game, and it's kind of ironic because I think that if Taylor had been healthy, he probably would have played that game. I think that heading into that game, the Jets didn't know who was going to start. I think if Tyrod had been healthy, he probably would have stepped into the lineup. Because he wasn't, Fields stepped into the lineup. Well, coming out of the bye, Aaron Glenn once again did not name his starting quarterback, and that seemed kind of silly. I think we knew that after Justin Fields played really well in a win, there was very little chance the Jets were going to turn over to Tyrod Taylor. I mean, what sense would that have made? It really would not have made much sense. After that game, after the Cleveland game, Glenn once again not naming his starter, and I'm assuming Fields is going to stay in the lineup. Now, Fields played a really bad game, and it's unfortunately been a theme this year that Justin Fields is either really good or really bad. And it's been one of the themes of Justin Fields' career. I don't think it's ever been as pronounced as it's been this season, where Justin Fields either plays great or he looks like the worst quarterback in the NFL. And unfortunately, against the Cleveland Browns last Sunday, Fields once again looked like maybe the worst quarterback in the NFL. He only had 54 passing yards, and 42 of them came on a screen where Breece Hall did all the work, and the Jets blockers helped him out. It wasn't really anything Fields did on that particular play. But I think it would be unusual for the Jets to make a quarterback change after a win. And I'm not saying that's how I would handle things. I'm not saying that that's the way NFL teams should handle things, but that's the way they do handle things. NFL teams and NFL coaches very focused on whether you win a game before they make a quarterback change. Would I expect big things from Justin Fields in this game? I think it's going to be really tough. I mean, first of all, Garrett Wilson's out of the lineup. So although, there is some benefit from the Jets from the standpoint that they're going to get an opportunity to get some of these young receivers they just acquired some reps, I think we should also acknowledge that, it's going to be very difficult for the Jets to move the ball through the air without Garrett Wilson in the lineup. These are young, inexperienced guys, and you're hoping to see signs from them. You're hoping to see that maybe they have a role on this team going forward as depth receivers, but that's different from saying, there's not a big drop in the lineup with Garrett Wilson out. New England's also a very tough run defense to move the ball against. There are only 7 teams in the NFL on defense that are allowing less than 4 yards per rushing attempt. The Patriots are one of them. So, this is a game where I would expect Breece Hall to fall back to earth. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Breece before the New England game was that I know the New England game is not shaping up to be a very productive game for him. The Patriots have a very stingy run defense. If Breece has a big game, it's going to be a very impressive performance. But even if Breece has a bad game against New England, I'm going to stand by what I said earlier. I think that the Jets should almost certainly bring Breece back next season because of the help he'll provide a young quarterback. But it's going to be really tough for the Jets to move the ball in this game. So undoubtedly, the Jets are looking at a very tough game to move the ball. And it's very likely Fields is going to have another really bad performance. And this will lead to more calls in the fan base for the Jets to turn to Tyrod Taylor. And I almost don't understand why people are so passionate about which of these two quarterbacks starts. And I guess in some ways, I've been there in the past where I've been really frustrated with the Jets starting quarterback playing poorly. And I felt, okay, well, we've got to make a change, or, there's something to it, I guess, where you just had enough of seeing a guy. But at the end of the day, this Jets season's over. Jets are 2-7. It doesn't really matter who starts at quarterback. Neither of these guys are going to play particularly well. I mean, is Tyrod going to go in there and run the offense at a higher level? We've seen him play a couple times this year, and he hasn't. He started the game against Tampa Bay. The only production Taylor had in that game was when the Jets were trailing by multiple scores in the fourth quarter, and the Bucs were playing a prevent defense. And, one of the criticisms of Fields is that too high a proportion of his offensive production comes when it's garbage time. Most of Tyrod's production against Tampa Bay was garbage time. And then Tyrod came in the second half of the Carolina game and led the Jets to nothing. And he threw a pair of bad interceptions. So, it's not really going to be anything gained by switching to Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod's at the end of his career. And look, I think what we can say right now is, first of all, this Jets season's a big disappointment. Second of all, the signing of Justin Fields was a whiff. The Jets struck out on him. And third of all, the Jets should have had a better backup plan to Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod, I said this all through the offseason. Tyrod was a guy who made sense for the 2024 Jets, much more than he made sense for the 2025 Jets. 2024 Jets wanted to have a veteran backup in here who could, maybe take over a couple games for Aaron Rodgers if anything happened to Rodgers. 2025, the Jets are pretty much starting anew. You brought in a quarterback, Justin Fields, where you took a big swing on a guy with some ability, but also a guy you knew probably was not going to work out, and a guy you knew you'd probably have to replace in season. And Tyrod was never going to be the guy for that. But it doesn't. I don't think either of these guys are going to give you much production. I don't think either of these guys are going to lead you to a good passing game, particularly without Garrett Wilson. If you want to make a change, fine, but I don't think there should be an assumption that Tyrod Taylor is going to be any better than Justin Fields, because when the two have been on the field this year, there hasn't been much difference in production. The only real difference is that Fields, when everything's working for him and he was playing a bad defense, against, say, Cincinnati, Fields may have a big game or two in him. I don't think Tyrod's got that, but we're near the end of the season. I don't think that this deserves the passion it's received, because at the end of the day, I mean, Jets are not going to get good quarterback play most likely. The passing game is going to struggle, and there's no quarterback solution on the team. That's probably why the Jets are looking at drafting a quarterback this spring. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will do our weekly mailbag show. Talk to you then.